Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the 1,775 poems of the Johnson edition of the poems of Emily Dickinson. We turn now to poem 29, If Those I Love Were Lost. It's a fascinating poem because it's a pretty obscure poem without some background knowledge. Now, any of us that have danced with Emily at all have always wondered what she read. We would love to be able to go back in a time machine and just sit down with her and say, tell us about the stuff that you read, and then explain to us the ways in which some of that reading would influence the way you would see the world. We will have some of that happening here, and we're going to let Johnson kind of help to explain for us, because some research has been done to help us, and we think we kind of know what's going on in this poem. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already experienced our introductory set of comments, and as well that you've worked through the earlier 28 poems we just finished with Daisies Vanished. And we're going to get to more daisies, actually, in this poem. Let's just read the poem, and then let's play around with some background knowledge, shall we? If those I loved were lost, the crier's voice would tell me. If those I loved were found, the bells of Ghent would ring. Did those I loved repose, the daisy would impel me. Philip, when bewildered, bore his riddle in. Now, the first thing I want to tell you about this is that Johnson points out that this volume, this poem, actually has some editing, and it runs like this. If those I loved were lost, the crier's voice would tell me, ne'er would, which is excised. If those I loved were found, the bells of Ghent would ring. Did those I loved repose, the daisy would impel me. Philip, and then marked out, questioned eager, I, my riddle bring, all edited out. Then, when bewildered, bore his riddle in. Now, Johnson will suggest, and I'm reading now, it seems possible this poem owes its inspiration to the very popular verse play, Philip van Artevelde, 1834, by Sir Henry Taylor. Among the Dickinson books at Harvard is an 1835 edition of it, published in Boston. It was owned by Austin and bears his label, William A. Dickinson. In the same collection is an 1863 edition inscribed in pencil, Emily. Evidently, it was an especially favored piece of literature in the Dickinson family. Now, Johnson and the story of Philip van Artevelde. Philip van Artevelde, born roughly 1340, dies 1382. It's going to be his death that we're most interested in. Successfully led the men of Ghent against the Count of Flanders, only to be slain when his forces later were routed with appalling loss, told by Fawcett, whose account Taylor follows. Philip's end, according to Fawcett, as quoted in Taylor's notes, was inglorious. Quote, it was judged that he fell into a little dike, a little kind of rut, and many of them of Ghent upon him, and was so pressed to death, end quote. In other words, he was basically smothered to death, a pretty inglorious death. In the play, the first play of Sir Henry Taylor of 1834, which, again, we believe that Emily read, Philip's final speech in the play will conclude with these questions. Quote, what have I done? Why such a death? Why thus? And then, oh, for a wound as wide as famine's mouth to make a soldier's passage for my soul. And then we're told that he's borne along in the route towards the bridge. This will be the riddle that is referenced here. Now we can come back and take a look at the poem, and it will make, I think, some sense to us. She says, if I were to lose the ones that I love best, if those I loved were lost, the crier's voice would tell me, right? If those I loved were found, the bells of Ghent, now we're referencing Philip, obviously, would ring. Did those I loved repose, the daisy would impel me. Now, this is an interesting observation. She says, I'm a little bit different from Philip, and here's why. Though the ones I love, I'm reminded there is a certain type of resurrection, a certain type of afterlife, because the daisy proves it. Now, this sounds a whole lot like Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, passage 6, where he will make the same observation that out of the buried dead will grow the grass, and the grass is proof there really is no death. I think she's playing a very similar game. But then she comes back to finish the poem with Philip. When bewildered, and again, I think this is the key word, because this is central to so much of Emily's project of, I just don't know, I'm wondering, which is why the first word of the poem is if, right? Uncertainty, maybe we would say. Philip, when bewildered, bore his riddle in. Well, what is this riddle? Well, I think she's playing, Johnson's probably right, I think she's playing with those three questions that he asked as he's being carried to his, to his funeral. The imagination is, the question is, what have I done? Why such a death? Why thus? The riddle. That is to say, it's never really clear for poor Philip that he gave his life appropriately, and he wishes or he longs for a legitimate kind of death. Now, in 2a, I think the message here is that loss of the ones we love is always tragic, but it's even more of a riddle if one does not believe in some kind of afterlife, in this case daisies, that will come back every spring to prove there really is no ultimate death. She has this belief then that she can explain the loss of those she cares about, and Philip obviously could not. I think that's the extension of this argument. At 2b, I love the reference here to a historical figure. We're going to see this a few more times in her poetry. And of course, making reference or alluding to a volume that she herself probably did read, maybe even inscribed. At 3a, well, obviously, this is Sir Henry Taylor's verse play of 1834 of Philip Van Artevelde. And finally, at 3b, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, to what degree have you gave some consideration to the fact that folks that you really care about are here and then they're gone? And how do you deal with that? Does the fact that in the spring flowers growing give you some sense of hope? And to what degree are you familiar with the death, maybe not so great, but a great individual who fought and died maybe, or lost their life, and you're familiar with that from history or from your personal affairs? Emily challenging us one more time to think about history as being our lives. Thank you.